embark on the Great Canadian Farm Tour, it is important to acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of Indigenous peoples. Agriculture in the Classroom Canada recognizes and honors the enduring presence of the diverse Indigenous communities across Canada, including the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We acknowledge the deep connection that Indigenous peoples have to the land, waters, resources, and all of agriculture. We express our gratitude for their stewardship and custodianship of these lands for generations. Agriculture in the Classroom Canada recognizes that acknowledging the traditional territories we reside and work on is only a small step towards reconciliation. We ask that we all continue to learn more about the Indigenous peoples in these regions, to consider the history and ongoing colonialism on this land, and to reflect on how each of us can contribute to reconciliation. Hello, bonjour! Welcome everyone to our next stop on Season 4 of the Great Canadian Farm Tour. We are so excited to have everyone join us today from across Canada. My name is Mercedes Unwin from Agriculture in the Classroom Canada, and I'll be your MC for today. Before we get started, we just want to provide a few reminders. For those who want to follow along in French, please use the Boostlingo link provided in the chat or event description to access the interpreting services provided today. We ask that everyone is mindful this is an educational event, so inappropriate conduct happening in the chat, such as spamming and improper comments, will not be tolerated. Throughout the tour, we welcome you to post your questions in the chat to get them answered. We'll answer as many questions as possible. The mystery word for your student activity books will appear at the end of this episode, so please stick around. Students, important questions to your student activities, such as the provincial tree and the meaning of the provincial coat of arms, will be shared during the brain break. Finally, we'd love to know where everyone is joining us from. Please comment in the chat your school and location. Now, we'd like to welcome our next tour host of the Great Canadian Farm Tour, Brian, who's a cranberry farmer in British Columbia. Hello, Brian.
Hello, how are you?
We're doing great. It's great to have you today.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
Now, Brian, we're so happy to have you join us today. But I was wondering if we could get started with you telling us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a farmer here in close to Fort Langley, BC. We've been farming here for 15 years. Grew up on a dairy farm and a hog farm, and then we started into cranberries. Born and raised here in British Columbia. I've traveled a lot, but I've always felt like this was home. So settled here with my wife, Mandy, and we have 5 children here on the farm.
Wow, Brian. It's so excited to hear a little bit more about your background and experiences. Before we get started with the tour, are there any schools you'd like to do a shout out to or say hello to?
I'd like to say hello to all the local schools around here, actually. Sorry, I've got stuff popping up on my screen. Yeah, the local schools here in the Fraser Valley, some of them have probably actually visited the farm here for tours during our harvest season. So I'd like to say hi to them and also to all the schools that are viewing us from all across this country.
Yeah, so it's great to have you here again and have all these schools join us from across Canada. We're going to get started with learning a bit more about cranberry farming with you, Brian, through a series of educational videos, and then you're going to help us answer some of the burning questions that students have from across Canada. So we're excited to hear those. So why don't we get started with our first video, and then Brian can just do a little bit of a pan of the farm that's behind him. So let's watch that drone footage first. Wow. So I don't know anything about cranberry farming, Brian, but it looks like you need a oppressive amount of land to do it just based on your drone footage and what is behind you right now. Can you do a little bit of a pan sweep to show us the farm behind you?
Sure, hang on one sec here. So directly behind me is 1 5-acre field. So then if you, hang on, let me get my head out of the way here. If you look out, you can see more of the fields the further we go. So there's another 5-acre towards the buildings, and then there's a 9-acre field in the back, a 10-acre field behind it, and then behind the little behind the barns over there, we have a tiny little field, which is where we do tours, and people can actually put their waders on and go down in the field and experience what it's like to be in a lot of cranberries.
Well, thanks for showing us a little bit more about the farm. Let's pull up a question from students across Canada and dive into what they'd like to know about cranberry farming with you. So, Miss Cummings' class, how much water is needed for cranberry crops, and how does that machine work that we saw that was going through the water?
Okay, so yeah, we need a lot of water. We don't grow them in water. We use water for irrigating. We use water for frost protecting, and obviously we use water for harvesting. So quick math, a 10-acre field, 30 million liters of water to bring it up to flooding height for harvest time.
And
Oh,
then
and the
in the
machine, yes.
machine, Brian, yeah.
Yeah, so that machine is, we call it a beater. Sometimes it's referred to as a cramboni, simply because we're going up and down like a Zamboni does in an ice rink. But it works with a turning head. So for those of you who are out on the prairies, you've probably seen a combine. The combine, the head turns and it harvests the fruit off. This one, the turning head spins, goes through the water. Because the cranberry is hollow, it's already trying to lift up, although it's still attached to the plant. This simply combs along and detaches it from the plant, and then the berries all float up.
Wow, it seems like you need a lot of water and a variety of different types of technology to make cranberry farming happen. How are you efficient in your water use, Brian?
Well, when we built the farm, we used the topography of the land. So one of the biggest, most important parts of building your farm is your land needs to be level. Obviously, water always finds its own level. So a level field uses the least amount of water. We built our farm with fields that are staged at different elevations. So the field directly behind me, this one here, versus that one. Ooh, gotta figure out my camera here. The one right there is, this one's 4 feet higher than the next one over, and the next one over is like 18 inches higher than the next one. So when we harvest with the water out of one field, we can actually just drop it down into the next field and use it again. So essentially, when we start our harvest, we fill up a bunch of the fields, and then we have enough water to do our entire harvest, as opposed to having to dump it and pump it again.
Wow, that's so interesting that you're just using the different variations of the land height to make sure you're just reusing the same water and over again to help with your cranberry harvesting. Let's do a couple more questions from students across Canada. So this question is, my class would like to know how deep the water has to be to harvest.
Again, it depends on how level your field is. So if we have a very level field, the plants don't grow very tall. So if we put in, and I'll talk in centimeters here because I'm sure that's what most of you are taught in school. We put in about 15 centimeters of water, like when before we run the harvester. So when you see the machine going through the field, there's about 15 inches of water in there, or sorry, 15 centimeters of water in there. Then once all the berries are knocked off, we actually bring the water up quite a bit higher. So we can run it as high as like 40 centimeters, 50 centimeters sometimes. That's probably ideal. And what that does is it lifts the berries high enough that when we collect them all into one part of the field, as we're moving them down the field, they're not touching the vine underneath, causing resistance. So they're very easy to move. Two people can move hundreds of tons of cranberries just by pulling on that boom, as long as there's enough water in the field.
What a great answer to that question. Let's do one more and then we'll proceed to our next video. So this question is, what is the date for harvesting? What does the seasonal life cycle look for cranberries?
That's actually a really good question, because the date that we harvest is actually dependent on the variety of cranberries that you have. If you look at the drone video, you might have noticed that there's all different colors in the fields as we're harvesting. The different varieties actually ripen at different times. So we harvest early. We have an early ripening variety. So September 15th usually would be a good day that we would be starting somewhere in the middle of the month. And we can go as long as, we could harvest all the way into mid-October. Some farmers actually just finished harvesting in this area, just finished harvesting about 10 days ago, probably, or 2 weeks ago at the latest.
That's so interesting when some people in Canada are experiencing snow at this time. So it's
Yeah,
interesting to see how it's different across the country.
yeah, yeah.
Let's go into our next video.
So if you look around, you can see cranberries floating in this field. We have the harvesting machine to my right here. And I'd like to just explain a little bit about how cranberries are grown. So cranberries are not grown in water. This is how we harvest them. They grow like any other plant, just in the field. They require irrigation, fertilizer, good drainage.
So that video was explaining how it's not actually grown in water, but it's just harvested, and that you need really good fertilizer and drainage to support the cranberries. Now, is it difficult to plant cranberries? What's the trick behind like growing and planting cranberries, Brian?
Is it difficult? I mean, like any plant, you have to pay attention to what it needs, but it's a lot of work. Like, again, leveling the fields, digging all the trenches, putting the drainage in, putting the irrigation in. It's very time consuming. The plant itself, it grows fairly quickly, but it doesn't go to fruit production for 3 years. So it's, again, time consuming. And when we're growing it in the first year, we can feed it a lot just to promote the growth, to fill the field in. And then once it's filled in, we just manage it based on what we see for the crop in terms of the flowers and the berries.
It's good to know that it takes 3 years before you see actual fruit. Do you kind of do a cyclical planting, or you're planting new plants every year?
No, the cranberry is a perennial. I mean, it's a native plant in this area. It's been harvested for centuries out here. Commercially, it's probably only been around for about 60 years, maybe. But once it's in the ground and planted, as long as you're maintaining it with the proper like pruning and the sanding is another thing that we have to do. I can explain that if you want. But if you do that, you should be able to harvest year in, year out, and get decent crops every year.
Wow, that's a great fact to know that your cranberry plants are perennial. Now let's pull up some questions and maybe we can expand a little bit more upon it. So let's get a question from students across Canada. And Miss Thorson's grade 3-4 split class are wondering if there are different kinds of cranberries, and what do the different kinds of cranberries kind of give you?
Yeah, there's a lot of different cranberries. If I had to guess, there's like 300 varieties, but commercially there's probably, sorry, hang on. Okay, sorry, my wife's correcting me. Yeah, so there's about 100 varieties of cranberries that are commercially grown, and of those, there's always going to be the top 4 or 5 that are favored simply because of their characteristics. So yeah, we have a variety here that produces a early ripening, larger berry, large crop, and it's actually less tart than traditional cranberries. So some people even will eat it as a fresh fruit, which is very uncommon for cranberries because of how sour they can be.
That's good to know a little bit about your cranberry variety that you plant. Is there a reason why you chose that one, Brian?
I think yield was probably the biggest factor at the time, simply because planting a farm, a cranberry farm, it's expensive. So in terms of yield, we get paid by the pound. So obviously that's going to be a pretty big determining factor. One of the unforeseen advantages to it is that it harvests quite early, and with the Canadian Thanksgiving being in usually early to mid-October, we can actually sell a lot of it for fresh fruit as well. And I actually really enjoy farming when the sun is shining, as opposed to mid-October weather, which can be very uncomfortable when you're sitting out on a tractor in the field or standing up, with ice cold water running over your hands. That's just not that enjoyable.
Well, it's all good things that you have to consider as a farmer of what you're looking for when you're trying to decide what plant variety to choose. So let's pull up a question from a student across Canada. Now, Sam, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, is wondering how many cranberries you harvest in a year. Should we ask them to maybe guess a little bit before you give an answer? Do you know how many pounds you got? It might be a lot.
I can tell you how many pounds. Actually, make them guess, and then making them guess how many cranberries, actually individual cranberries, they think that is.
Okay, so what we're going to ask everybody is guess how many pounds that Brian harvests in a year, and what does that translate on a per cranberry basis. And while we're waiting for those responses, what we'll do is go to our commercial brain break, and we'll be back in a minute and 40 seconds. So see you everyone in a minute 40 seconds to see all those answers. So goodbye for now. See you in a minute. So we are back with Brian, and we have a lot of answers to your question, Brian, around how many pounds or per cranberry that translates to. So let's just see them pop up. So we have students guessing 3,000, 750,000 pounds, 20,000 pounds, 657,000 pounds. So we have lots of different answers coming in. 5 million cranberries that translates to. And as we're pulling up these answers, we're just having some technical difficulties with Brian, so we're just going to get him back up here in a second.
Yeah, I'm back.
You're back? Okay. I don't know if you heard any of these answers, Brian, but we have kids guessing 30,000 pounds, 3,000 pounds, 5 million individual cranberries. What's the answer to this question, Brian?
Okay, well, everybody's not even close. So we produce about 30,000 pounds per acre. So we have a 34-acre cranberry farm here. It doesn't mean that every acre produces that much, but that's typically an average. So this past year we were down a bit. We did about 925,000 pounds. And every cranberry weighs 1.5 grams. So the simple math is there's 300 cranberries in a pound. That's 270 million plus individual cranberries. So it's a lot, semi-loads.
That is tons of cranberries. And thank you, everyone, for your great guesses. Now, what we'll do is move on to our next videos. We have 2 left, so we'll get to our 3rd video, and then we'll answer some more questions with Brian. So let's bring up that 3rd video.
So at harvest time here on the farm, what we do is we bring in water into the field, and then we run a machine through the field to pop the berries off. Now every cranberry, the good cranberries anyways, inside they have hollow air pockets. There's 4 of them, usually 4, only 4 air pockets in every cranberry, which makes them float, which also makes it a lot easier for us to harvest, because once we have all the berries knocked off, we can take these floating booms that we wrap around, pull all the berries into one corner of the field, put a pump in the field, and suck all the berries out. Now, when you suck the berries out, you get a lot of trash, leaves. So the berries go up over top of the screen where the water and the leaves get flushed out, and the berries roll down the screen into the truck. And when they're loaded up into the truck, we take them out to the processing plant where they further clean them. They take any of the rotten fruit out, any of the trash that makes it through, and there they package it for a freezer, where most of this will actually go to make your dried cranberries, craisins.
It's so cool to hear about how cranberries float. It's because of the unique air pockets they have that makes them so much easier to float, which is why you're able to harvest them via water. So unique to learn about all these different things about what makes a plant unique. Let's learn a little bit more with you, Brian, with some questions from students across Canada. So Miss Thorson's grade 3-4 split class, Ben specifically is wondering if any animals get into the cranberries, frogs, tadpoles, any other animals just try to eat them up, and how do you deal with that?
Well, thankfully the cranberry is so tart that very, very few animals will actually come in here and eat them. We have had Canada geese during the harvest. They like to pre-stuff themselves for Thanksgiving. So yeah, we've definitely had a few of them in there eating cranberries. But for the most part, we don't deal with a lot of animal pests. There's frogs around because it's a wetland. We have a lot of water around the farm. In fact, right behind me by these trees, there's the Fraser River is right behind our property. So we have frogs, we have tadpoles, we definitely see animals. We had a beaver this year on the farm. We've had mink, otters. We had a bear here this summer. So, but they tend to leave the cranberries alone and go over to the neighbor who has blueberries, which are a much sweeter plant or a much sweeter fruit.
Oh, it's a good thing you have the blueberry farmer beside you to
Yeah.
lure them away for you.
Yes.
So that's interesting. Now you don't have to deal with do the frogs ever get caught up into your machinery when you're harvesting them, or they completely just go over to the blueberries?
No, well, thankfully for the that we harvest, most of the frogs are out of the field. Like they'll go to the edges of the field, so they don't tend to be an issue when we're harvesting. If they do go through and get pumped into the truck, I mean, at multiple stages along the way, they can get separated out of the system. It's not uncommon to see frogs jumping across the top of the cranberries as they make their way over to the sides of the field, but no, it's very rare that we actually see them go through into the truck.
Well, it's a good thing to know we have all these different kind of stages that kind of prevent it from happening. So let's pull up
Yeah.
another great question. From Miss King's class, how did you decide to work at a cranberry farm?
I get this question quite often. It's interesting. So after I graduated high school, I traveled a bit, and then when I came back, I was working on a dairy farm, and across the road, they were developing a very large cranberry farm. And I watched that go on for years and years. And to me, it was just fascinating. Never, ever suspecting that I would actually be on a cranberry farm. And then a few years later, my dad sold his dairy farm, and the opportunity came up to do cranberries. And so we started with that. And then a bunch of years later, so probably about 14 years later, the opportunity came up for my wife and I to build our own farm, literally right across the road from where I grew up. And, we jumped on that one. This is what we have now.
Well, it kind of shows, thanks to your response, that you can get into different types of farming and not really know anything about it and just take the leap, because you have a past and experience with dairy farming, but you didn't continue with dairy farming. You said, let's do cranberry farming.
Yeah, and the difference between livestock and plants is, I mean, it's night and day, right? So it's definitely been a learning curve. I will always say that no 2 days are the same on the farm, but it's been an incredible journey for sure.
Well, if there's any students out there who are just looking for something that's different and takes on all of your skill sets, because when you're a farmer, you kind of have to know and do everything. If you're looking for something different and a different experience every day, then become a cranberry farmer, right?
Mm,
So let's
yeah.
look into our last video and then we'll do a couple more questions and wrap up with Brian for today.
Yeah.
It's so amazing just to see the cranberries being pumped in the truck, pardon me, and thousands of cranberries just going in there. So let's jump right in there and have some final questions answered with Brian from Students Across Canada. So Lily wonders, do you make anything with the cranberries? So do you keep any for yourself to make stuff with it?
Yes, we actually do. Part of our business plan here was to market our own products. So we have a retail line of juices and sauce and pepper jelly. We do freeze dried. There's some chocolate covered. There's powder. We have a store here on the farm, and then we also sell actually across BC. You'll see the Bog is the brand. You'll see it in the stores, and we're moving into Alberta at the moment. So yes, we do a lot with cranberries.
Well, it just shows of the diversity of opportunities you can have on the farm by the fact that your portfolio includes processing the cranberries and making it into unique end products for people to enjoy.
Yeah, most of that is done with other small business here locally. Like we don't make our own juice; we ship them our cranberries. They press it and
Yeah.
bottle us. So we work with quite a few different small businesses to do that. On the farm itself, it doesn't make sense to do that. We concentrate on farming and growing the cranberries, and that's the best thing that we can do here, and let other people, work their expertise elsewhere.
Yeah, well, definitely the opportunities for partnership and to grow your local
Yeah.
community is fantastic. So let's do one more question from students across Canada and then we'll wrap up with Brian. So, Miss Thorson's grade 3-4 split class, do you like cranberries? And what's your favorite way to eat them, Brian?
I do like cranberries. My favorite way to eat them, ooh, I love a cranberry orange muffin. I love a cranberry apple crisp. Hang on. Yeah, and we actually eat a lot of cranberry sauce here on the farm. It's easy to make, and it just goes so well with all the different. You don't just eat it with turkey. We put it on meatballs, mashed potatoes, rice, you name it. It's a definitely a every night at the supper table. It's on the table.
Oh, well, I think just from sharing what you do with cranberries, I'm going to put the challenge out to myself and everyone watching. Go find and try something unique with cranberries, a unique dish, a unique experience, and try something new. And you might find that you want to make cranberries part of your daily diet every day.
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
Brian, thank you so much for sharing with us the important information about cranberry farming. Before we end today's tour, is there anything you'd like to share? Any final words do you want to share with everyone?
Yeah, I think I'd like to just reinforce what you just said. Like make them a part of your day. They're a super healthy fruit. Any of the berries, the blueberries, the cranberries, there's a half a dozen other ones. They're all super fruits. They're really good for your body, and make them a part of your everyday diet. And also try to get out to farms. Come out to the ones that are doing the tours, learn about what's going on. Bug your parents. to take you out and see what, where your food comes from, because it's really good to know, what's going on out there, who's growing it, how it's grown, and you'll learn a lot when you're out on the farm.
No. Well, thank you for sharing all this information with us. I know I learned something new today. I'm sure everyone else did. Before we close off this episode, and thank you everyone for waiting patiently, I'm excited to share the mystery word is love, or aimons en français. So this is actually a great word because we all love cranberries now because we learned so much more with Brian. Our next episode of the Great Canadian Farm Tour will be on December 5th, and that'll be our final stop for our Great Canadian Farm Tour for this school year. And it'll be at an ice cream production facility in Manitoba, which might be another good thing to put cranberries on, is on ice cream.
It's been done. It has been done.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you to Brian. And I want to share all the thanks that are being shown on the screen right now. Brian, you may not be able to see them, but everybody's saying thank you to you. And we're going to say goodbye for now. Bye, everyone.
All right. Take care. See you.